I stepped through the front door, my heart heavy with worries about my son Jake and his family. As I entered the living room, I froze at the sight before me. My husband Doug had our 8-year-old grandson Caleb pinned against the wall, his face contorted with rage. "Where's the money, you little thief?" Doug snarled, shaking Caleb roughly. "I know you stole it from my wallet." Caleb sobbed, his face streaked with tears. "I didn't take anything, Grandpa. I swear." "Doug, what are you doing?" I cried out, rushing over to pull him away from Caleb. "Have you lost your mind? He's just a child." Doug released his grip on Caleb, who ran to me and buried his face against my legs, trembling. I wrapped my arms around him protectively, shocked by my husband's uncharacteristic outburst. "Money's missing from my office," Doug said gruffly, avoiding my accusing stare, "and this little brat was snooping around in there earlier." "That doesn't mean Caleb took anything," I said firmly, stroking our grandson's hair to soothe him. "You know he would never steal from us." Doug's jaw clenched. "Well, the money didn't just disappear on its own. Someone in this house is a thief." My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of the situation. Jake and his wife Amber had always seemed like the perfect couple, doting parents to Caleb. What could have driven one of them to steal from us? Just then, the front door opened and Amber walked in, her pretty face etched with worry. "What's going on?" I heard shouting. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, Doug's furious expression, Caleb clinging to me and crying. I saw a flicker of fear cross her features before she masked it. "Doug, I need to talk to you," Amber said, her voice shaking slightly. "In private. It's important." I tensed, sensing that whatever she had to say would be the key to unraveling this painful mystery. After settling Caleb in the kitchen with a snack, I followed Doug and Amber to the back patio, bracing myself for the truth. Amber took a deep breath, twisting her hands nervously. "I know what happened to the missing money," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "It was me. I took it." Doug exploded. "You lying, thieving." "Let her explain," I cut him off sharply before turning to Amber. "Why would you do this? Steal from your own family?" She broke down, sobs racking her slender frame. "I'm so sorry," Amber choked out. "I never meant for it to go this far, but I'm in trouble, deep trouble." The story came out between gasping breaths and fresh tears. Amber had been hiding a serious gambling addiction, racking up massive debts in secret. Desperate to get money to pay off her bookies before Jake found out, she had resorted to pilfering cash from Doug's office for months. "Please, you can't tell Jake," she begged us. "It will destroy our marriage. I'll get help, I swear. Just give me a chance to make this right." I looked at Doug, seeing my own shock and disappointment mirrored in his eyes. Our once perfect family was crumbling before us, torn apart by Amber's deceit. Could we really keep such a devastating secret from our own son? My heart ached as I realized the impossible choice that lay ahead. No matter what we did next, someone would get hurt, and the scars left behind may never fully heal. The weight of Amber's confession hung heavy in the air as Doug and I sat across from her at the kitchen table. Her once carefully applied makeup was now smeared from crying, her eyes red and puffy. "How could you do this to Jake?" "To Caleb?" I asked, my voice thick with disappointment. "Your gambling addiction has put your entire family at risk." Amber flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I never meant for it to get this bad." "But," she whispered, "at first it was just a little money here and there. But then I started losing more than I could afford." Doug slammed his fist on the table, making us both jump. "And you thought stealing from me was the answer? Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" "I'm sorry," Amber sobbed. "I was desperate. The bookies were threatening me, saying they'd come after Jake and Caleb if I didn't pay up." A chill ran down my spine at the thought of my son and grandson in danger because of Amber's reckless behavior. How had she let things spiral so far out of control? "How much do you owe?" I asked, dreading the answer. Amber hesitated, her gaze dropping to her lap. $50,000, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Doug let out a low whistle. "Jesus Christ, Amber, that's more than Jake makes in a year. How the hell are you going to pay that back?" "I don't know," she said miserably. "But I have to try. I can't let Jake find out about this. It would destroy him." I felt a flare of anger at her words. "You should have thought of that before you started gambling away your family's future," I snapped. Amber's shoulders shook with fresh sobs. I know, but please, Tina. Doug, you can't tell Jake. I'm begging you. I exchanged a long look with my husband, seeing the conflict in his eyes. As much as we wanted to protect our son from the truth, we both knew that keeping Amber's secret would only make things worse in the long run. We can't lie to Jake, I said firmly. He deserves to know what's going on. Amber's face crumpled. Please, just give me a chance to fix this on my own. I'll do whatever it takes, get a second job, sell some of my things. I'll make it right, I swear. Doug shook his head. And what happens when the bookies come knocking on Jake's door demanding their money? Are you going to put your husband and child in danger to cover your own ass? No, of course not, Amber cried. I would never let that happen. But if Jake finds out, he'll leave me. I can't lose my family over this. I felt a pang of sympathy for her, despite my anger and disappointment. Addiction was a terrible disease, one that could make even the most loving person behave in unthinkable ways. You need help, Amber, I said gently. Professional help, and you need to come clean to Jake before things get any worse. She buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. I'm so scared, she whispered. What if he can't forgive me? I reached across the table to take her hand, feeling the tremors that ran through her. Jake loves you, I reminded her, but he deserves the truth, and you deserve the chance to get better, for yourself and for your family. Amber took a shuddering breath, then nodded slowly. You're right, she said, her voice small but determined. I'll tell him everything tonight, and I'll get help. I promise. As I watched her walk out the door, shoulders slumped in defeat, I could only hope that it wasn't too late for her, or for the family she had so nearly destroyed with her lies. The sound of the front door slamming jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 2:37 a.m. My heart sank as I heard Jake's heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, knowing that Amber must have finally confessed her gambling addiction to him. I pulled on my robe and hurried out into the hallway, nearly colliding with Doug. We exchanged a worried look before Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. Did you know? He demanded, his voice shaking. Did you know about Amber's gambling problem? I hesitated, not wanting to lie to my son, but also reluctant to admit the truth. She told us earlier today, I said carefully. We encouraged her to come clean to you. Jake let out a harsh laugh. Well, she certainly did that, right after I found a letter from some bookie threatening to break my kneecaps if she didn't pay up. Doug sucked in a sharp breath. Jesus, Jake, I'm so sorry. We had no idea it had gotten that bad. Bad? Jake echoed incredulously. It's a fucking disaster. My wife has been lying to me for months, stealing money from her own family to feed her addiction. And now we're in debt up to our eyeballs with no way out. I reached out to touch his arm, but he jerked away from me. Jake, please. Amber needs help. She's sick. She's a liar and a thief, he spat. I don't even know who she is anymore. The venom in his voice made me flinch. I had never seen my son so angry, so hurt. It broke my heart to think of the pain Amber had caused him. What are you going to do? Doug asked quietly. Jake ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back, but we have Caleb to think about. At the mention of their son, I felt a surge of protectiveness. You can't let Amber's mistakes tear your family apart, I urged. Caleb needs both of his parents. Does he? Jake asked bitterly. Does he need a mother who lies and steals and puts her own selfish desires above her family's well-being? I opened my mouth to argue, but Doug cut me off with a sharp look. That's not your decision to make, Tina, he said firmly. Jake and Amber need to work this out for themselves. Jake nodded, his jaw clenched tight. I need some time to think, he said. I can't even look at her right now without wanting to scream. Why don't you stay here tonight? I offered. Give yourself some space to clear your head. For a moment I thought he might refuse, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Yeah, okay, he agreed. Thanks, Mom. As I watched him disappear into the guest room, I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. I wanted so badly to fix this for him, to take away his pain and anger. But I knew that this was a battle he would have to fight on his own. I turned to Doug, seeing the same worry and frustration etched on his face. What are we going to do? I asked softly. He sighed heavily. We support them, he said. Both of them. and we pray like hell that they find a way through this mess. I nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult for Jake and Amber, but I also knew that as a family, we would face it together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The tension in the air was palpable as Doug and I sat across from Jake at the kitchen table the next morning. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. I pushed a mug of coffee towards him, but he ignored it, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "Have you heard from Amber?" I asked gently, breaking the heavy silence. Jake shook his head. "No, and I don't want to. Not until I've figured out what I'm going to do." Doug leaned forward, his expression grim. "I know you're hurting, son, but you need to think about Caleb in all this. He needs his mother." "Does he?" Jake asked bitterly. "What kind of mother lies and steals from her own family? What kind of example is that setting for him?" I flinched at the harshness in his voice. "Jake, addiction is a disease. Amber needs help, not condemnation." "She should have thought of that before she started gambling away our future," he snapped. "Before she put our son at risk with her selfish behavior." Doug's face darkened. "I agree. Amber's actions are inexcusable, and if it were up to me, I'd say you should cut her loose and never look back." "Doug," I gasped, shocked by his callousness. "How can you say that? She's your daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandson." He shrugged, unmoved. "She stopped being family the moment she betrayed Jake's trust. As far as I'm concerned, he owes her nothing." Jake looked torn, his eyes darting between us. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I love Amber, but I don't know if I can ever trust her again. And Caleb, he needs stability, not a mother who could relapse at any moment." "So fight for custody," Doug urged. "Get a good lawyer and make sure Amber never has the chance to hurt Caleb again." I stared at my husband in disbelief. How could he be so cold, so unforgiving? Yes, Amber had made a terrible mistake, but she was still a part of our family, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing her completely. "Please, Jake," I begged, "don't make any rash decisions. Amber is getting help. She's trying to make things right." He shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. "I don't know if I can forgive her, Mom. Not after everything she's done." "At least give her a chance to explain," I pleaded. "Hear her out before you do anything drastic." For a long moment, Jake was silent. Then finally he nodded. "Fine, I'll talk to her, but I'm not making any promises." Relief washed over me, even as Doug shot me a disapproving look. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult for all of us, but I couldn't give up on Amber, not when she needed us most. As Jake left to go confront his wife, I turned to Doug, my eyes narrowed. "How could you be so cruel?" I demanded. "Amber is family. We can't just turn our backs on her." "She stopped being family the moment she betrayed us," he said coldly. "And if Jake has any sense, he'll cut her out of his life for good." I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger and disappointment. "I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be so heartless," I said. "Amber needs our support, not our condemnation." Doug's face hardened. "She needs to face the consequences of her actions. And if that means losing her husband and son, then so be it." As he stalked out of the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. I had always known my husband to be a stern man, but never cruel. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if I even recognized the person he had become, or if our family would ever be the same again. The days following Jake and Amber's confrontation were tense and uncomfortable. My son had agreed to give his wife one more chance, but the trust between them had been shattered. I could see the strain on both their faces, the way they avoided each other's eyes and spoke in clipped, formal tones. I tried my best to be supportive, offering to watch Caleb so they could have time to talk things through. But every time I brought up the subject of Amber's addiction, Jake would shut down, his jaw clenching with barely suppressed anger. It was during one of these conversations that I made a shocking discovery. I was tidying up Doug's home office, sorting through the piles of paperwork that had accumulated on his desk, when I stumbled across a series of bank statements. At first glance, they seemed innocuous enough, but as I looked closer, I felt my blood run cold. There, in black and white, were a series of withdrawals from our joint savings account, thousands of dollars, all funneled into an account I didn't recognize. And the dates. They went back months, long before Amber's gambling addiction had come to light. With shaking hands, I confronted Doug that evening. "What is this?" I demanded, thrusting the statements at him. "Where has all this money been going?" For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then his expression hardened. "That's none of your concern, Tina. I'm handling it." "Handling what?" I pressed. "Doug, this is our money, our future. You can't just take it without telling me." He sighed heavily, running a hand over his face. "Fine. If you must know, I've been giving Amber money to help pay off her debts." I stared at him in disbelief. "What? Why would you do that? We agreed to let Jake and Amber handle this on their own." "Because I don't trust her," Doug said bluntly. "I've been keeping tabs on her, making sure she's not falling back into old habits, and when I saw how much she owed, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." Anger surged through me, hot and bright. "So you went behind my back? Behind Jake's back? Doug, how could you?" "I did what I had to do to protect our family," he snapped. "Amber's addiction has already caused enough damage. I won't let her drag us down with her." I shook my head, feeling sick to my stomach. "This isn't protection, Doug. It's enabling. You're not helping Amber. You're just making it easier for her to keep gambling." "That's not true," he argued. "I've been making her give me receipts, proof that she's using the money to pay off her debts. I'm keeping her accountable." "And what happens when Jake finds out?" I demanded. "What happens when he realizes that his own father has been lying to him, just like Amber has?" Doug's face paled. "He won't find out, because you're not going to tell him." I let out a harsh laugh. "You really expect me to keep this a secret from our son? Doug, this is wrong. You know it is." "What's wrong is letting Amber destroy our family," he said coldly. "And if keeping this secret is what it takes to prevent that, then so be it." I stared at him, hardly recognizing the man I had married, the man I had loved for over 40 years. In that moment, I realized that Doug's obsession with controlling Amber had blinded him to the damage he was causing. And I knew that if I didn't put a stop to it, our family might never recover. "No," I said firmly. "I won't be a part of this, not anymore. Amber needs help, not more lies and deceit. And if you can't see that, then I don't know what else to say to you." As I turned and walked away, I felt a heaviness in my heart that I had never known before. I had always believed that Doug and I were a team, that we could face anything together, but now I wasn't so sure. And that uncertainty terrified me more than anything else. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. Doug and I barely spoke, the tension between us thick and suffocating. I threw myself into caring for Caleb, trying to provide some sense of normalcy for my grandson in the midst of all the chaos. But even that small comfort was shattered when Jake showed up at our door one evening, his face pale and drawn. "Amber's gone," he said, his voice hollow. "She left a note saying she couldn't take the pressure anymore, that she needed to get away and clear her head." My heart sank as I saw the pain in my son's eyes. "Oh, Jake, I'm so sorry. Do you have any idea where she might have gone?" He shook his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "No, she didn't say, but I think she might have relapsed. I found some new gambling receipts in her purse before she left." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. After everything we had been through, all the lies and betrayal, Amber had thrown away her second chance. And now my son and grandson were left to pick up the pieces. Over the next few days, I did my best to support Jake as he tried to track down his missing wife. He called every casino and racetrack in the area, hoping someone had seen her. But as the days stretched into weeks with no sign of Amber, I could see the hope draining from his eyes. It was during one of these fruitless searches that I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Jake was on the phone with one of Amber's old gambling buddies, his voice tight with anger and frustration. "What do you mean? She's planning to leave the state. Where is she going?" he demanded. There was a pause, then Jake's face turned ashen. "She's taking Caleb with her?" "No, no way in hell. She can't do that. Not without my permission." My heart seized with fear as I realized the depths of Amber's desperation. She wasn't just running away from her problems anymore. She was trying to kidnap her own son. I knew then that I had to do something. I couldn't let Amber destroy Jake's life any more than she already had, and I certainly couldn't let her take Caleb away from the only stable home he had ever known. So I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I called the police and reported Amber's plans, telling them everything I knew about her gambling addiction and the threats she had made against my family. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, betraying my own daughter-in-law like that. But I knew in my heart that it was the right thing to do. Caleb's safety had to come first, no matter what the cost. When the police arrived at Jake and Amber's house later that day, they found her in the midst of packing her bags, a confused and frightened Caleb by her side. She was arrested on the spot, charged with attempted kidnapping and child endangerment. I watched from the sidelines as they led her away in handcuffs, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Jake stood nearby, his expression unreadable, as he held Caleb close. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice choked with tears. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let her take Caleb away from you." For a long moment, Jake was silent. Then he turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "You did the right thing, Mom. I know it wasn't easy, but you protected Caleb. That's all that matters." As I watched the police car drive away, Amber's face pressed against the window in despair. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction wash over me. She had brought this on herself, with her lies and her selfish choices, and now she would face the consequences. But even as I tried to convince myself that justice had been served, I couldn't shake the feeling that our family would never be the same again, that the wounds Amber had inflicted might never fully heal. The days following Amber's arrest were a blur of police interviews, legal meetings, and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Jake was a wreck, torn between his anger at his wife's betrayal and his fear for Caleb's well-being. I did my best to support him, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. It was during one of these tense discussions that I finally learned the full extent of Amber's plans. According to the police, she had been secretly funneling money into a private bank account for months, stockpiling cash for her eventual escape. And she had planned to take Caleb with her, fleeing the state and starting a new life somewhere far away from the consequences of her actions. The thought of losing my grandson forever made my blood run cold. I knew then that I had made the right decision in turning Amber in, no matter how much it hurt to betray her trust. But even as I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of guilt that plagued me. What if I had been too harsh on Amber? What if I had pushed her to this point with my constant criticism and judgment? These thoughts weighed heavily on my mind as I sat in the courtroom, watching as Amber was led in wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. She looked small and fragile, her once vibrant eyes now dull and lifeless. As the judge read out the charges against her, I saw a flicker of something in Amber's expression. Not remorse or regret, but a cold, calculating anger that made my skin crawl. And then, to my horror, she turned to face Jake and Caleb, her lips curling into a sneer. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just cast me aside and move on with your lives? Well, think again." Jake recoiled as if he had been slapped, his face draining of color. Caleb whimpered and buried his face in his father's shoulder, too young to understand the cruel words being hurled at him. "I'll get out of here eventually," Amber continued, her eyes flashing with malice. "And when I do, I'll come for my son. I'll take him away from you, and you'll never see him again. That's a promise." The courtroom erupted into chaos, with the judge banging his gavel and ordering Amber to be removed from the room. But even as the bailiffs dragged her away, her words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched Jake try to comfort a sobbing Caleb. How could Amber be so cruel, so selfish? How could she threaten to take away the one thing that mattered most to her own child? In that moment, I knew that I had to do everything in my power to protect my grandson, to make sure that Amber never had the chance to hurt him again. So I made a vow, right then and there. I would fight for Caleb no matter what it took. I would make sure that he grew up in a safe and loving home, surrounded by people who truly cared for him. And as for Amber, well, she had made her choices. She had chosen her addiction over her family, her own selfish desires over the well-being of her child. And now she would have to live with the consequences. As I left the courtroom that day, my heart heavy with grief and anger, I knew that our family would never be the same again. But I also knew that we would survive this, somehow. We would pick up the pieces and move forward one day at a time. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would be there for Jake and Caleb. Always. The years that followed Amber's sentencing were a time of healing and rebuilding for our family. Jake threw himself into his work, determined to provide a stable life for Caleb, and I did my best to be there for both of them, offering love and support whenever they needed it. But even as we tried to move forward, the specter of Amber's betrayal hung over us like a dark cloud. Caleb in particular struggled with the loss of his mother. He would often wake up crying in the middle of the night, calling out for her in his sleep. It broke my heart to see my grandson in so much pain, but I knew that we had made the right decision in cutting Amber out of our lives. She had proven time and again that she was not capable of being a good mother or a trustworthy partner. Still, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt whenever I thought about the role I had played in tearing our family apart. If I had been more understanding, more supportive of Amber's struggles, could things have turned out differently? These thoughts plagued me as I watched Jake and Caleb slowly rebuild their lives. Jake started dating again, eventually meeting a kind and loving woman named Sarah, who accepted Caleb as her own. And Caleb, with the help of therapy and a stable home life, began to thrive in school and make new friends. But even as our family healed and grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, that there was a piece of our hearts that would always belong to Amber, no matter how much we tried to forget her. It all came to a head one day when I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic. I stumbled across a photo album from Jake and Amber's wedding day, their smiling faces beaming up at me from the pages. As I flipped through the pictures, memories of happier times flooding back, I felt a sudden wave of emotion wash over me. Anger, sadness, regret, it all came rushing back in a tidal wave of grief. And then, as if summoned by my thoughts, the phone rang. It was Amber, calling from prison. She had been granted early release for good behavior and wanted to see Caleb. I felt my heart constrict with fear and anger as I listened to her plead her case. How dare she, after everything she had put us through? How could she possibly think that we would let her back into our lives? But as I listened to the desperation in her voice, the genuine remorse and longing, I felt something inside me soften. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for redemption. Maybe Amber had truly changed and was ready to be the mother Caleb deserved. I knew it was a risk. I knew that Jake would be furious with me for even considering it. But in that moment, I made a decision that would change all of our lives once again. I agreed to let Amber see Caleb, under strict supervision and with the understanding that she would have to prove herself worthy of a place in his life. It was a gamble, a leap of faith, but one that I felt compelled to take. As I hung up the phone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope, I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks and challenges, moments of doubt and pain. But I also knew that if there was even a chance of bringing our family back together, of healing the wounds that had torn us apart, I had to try. For Caleb's sake, for Jake's sake, and for the sake of the love that had once bound us all together. And so, with a deep breath and a silent prayer, I prepared myself for the journey ahead. A journey of forgiveness, of second chances, and of the power of a mother's love to overcome even the darkest of betrayals. The incessant pounding at the door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock. 11:37 p.m. Fear crept in as I clutched my robe, tiptoeing down the stairs. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Grandma, it's us! Please open up!" Two small voices pierced through the howling wind and pelting rain. I swung the door open to find my grandsons, Alex and Caleb, drenched and shivering on my doorstep. Caleb clung to a crumpled piece of paper in his tiny fist. "Boys? What on earth?" My words caught in my throat as I ushered them inside, wrapping them in thick towels. "Mom, she left us at the park," Alex said between chattering teeth. "She told us to come here." Caleb shakily held up the note. "Read it, Grandma." My hands trembled as I smoothed out the soggy paper. 5 scrawled words made my heart plummet. "Take them to Grandma's house." Jenna's looping cursive mocked me from the page. How could she abandon her own children like this? "I'm so sorry, boys," I whispered, pulling them into a fierce embrace. Caleb's little body shook with sobs. "You're safe now. I've got you." I marched them upstairs, bundling them into warm pajamas. Haunted eyes followed my every move as they huddled on the guest bed. "Will Mom come back for us?" Caleb asked, his voice tiny and fragile. I froze, unsure how to respond. After everything she'd put them through, would Jenna really want them back? Swallowing hard, I gently brushed Caleb's damp curls from his forehead. "We'll figure this out tomorrow. Tonight, you just need to rest." Alex remained stoic, clenching his jaw to mask the fear flickering in his eyes. At 10 years old, he tried so hard to be the brave one. As I settled into the armchair beside their bed, their shuddering breaths slowed into the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Yet haunting questions whirled in my mind, dark memories stirring. My relationship with Jenna had been fraught from the beginning. The sweet, loving girl my son Derek fell for vanished after their wedding, replaced by someone manipulative and cold-hearted. Still, she was their mother. What desperation could drive a parent to abandon their own flesh and blood? A gnawing suspicion took root. This was about more than just bad parenting. Staring at my grandson's sleeping forms, their cheeks still glistening with drying tears, a fierce protectiveness burned within me. I would get to the bottom of Jenna's deceit, whatever it took. For now they were home, they were safe, and I would do everything in my power to ensure it stayed that way. As the first pale rays peeked through the curtains, I allowed my eyes to drift shut, steeling myself for the maelstrom ahead. The shrill trill of the phone jolted me awake at the crack of dawn. I immediately tensed, scanning the bed. Relief washed over me as I saw Alex and Caleb huddled together, still slumbering peacefully. "Hello?" I whispered, padding out of the room. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Sheriff Davis. We received a troubling report last night from a family at Oak Ridge Park." My stomach twisted into knots as the sheriff proceeded to recount how a hysterical Jenna had shown up in the middle of the night, rambling about voices telling her to hurt the boys. She'd fled before the cops arrived, leaving Alex and Caleb alone on a rain-soaked park bench. "We've been searching all night, but there's no sign of her." His gruff voice softened. "I know you two had your differences, but are the boys safe with you?" Squeezing my eyes shut, I managed a tight nod before realizing he couldn't see me. Yes, they're here, safe and sound." After ending the call, my hands trembled as I glimpsed the shredded remnants of my tranquil, retired life around me. How could Jenna put her own sons through such trauma? I hurried back to the bedroom, my heart clenching at the sight of them cuddled together like orphaned kittens. Jenna's depraved actions were utterly unforgivable, but what terrified me most was the possibility of far deeper depravities lurking beneath the surface. Voices telling her to hurt them, or her own twisted thoughts whirling out of control. Over the next few days, I discreetly made inquiries around town, desperate for any clues that could shed light on the dark path Jenna had ventured down. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. "She's lost her mind, plain and simple," Derek's old friend Mitch grimly told me one afternoon while I had the boys occupied playing in the backyard. "Got mixed up with some real nasty people, from what I gathered." My heart pounded as Mitch detailed rumors of shady business deals, illicit money trails, and unsettling new acquaintances in Jenna's life. "They're saying she did things, illegal things, to keep the cash flowing after Derek." He shook his grizzled head sadly. After Derek's death in that horrific car crash 6 months ago, Jenna had rapidly changed, staying out at all hours, dressing in ostentatious new clothes, and lavishly showering the boys with toys and gifts she couldn't afford on a widow's pension. The picture grew exponentially uglier the more I unearthed. Theft, embezzlement, fraud, no depravity seemed off-limits in Jenna's warped quest for wealth and status. And at the center of this web of lies and immorality were my beloved grandsons, forced to fend for themselves as collateral damage while their own mother indulged her demons. One night after the boys were tucked in, I stood at the bay window, staring out at the inky darkness. "I will burn it all down to ashes if I have to," I murmured in a voice that chilled even me. "She won't go unpunished for this, not on my watch." The wheels were in motion to expose the full extent of Jenna's deception. I could only pray I wasn't too late to protect Alex and Caleb from the worst of the fallout. The rusty hinges of the attic door protested as I pulled it down, thick dust motes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. I couldn't recall the last time I'd ventured up here. After Derek's passing, Any reminders were too agonizing. But to have a prayer of protecting Alex and Caleb from Jenna's toxicity, I needed to understand how we'd arrived at this catastrophic juncture. So I steeled myself and climbed the creaky ladder. Coughing through the musty air, I aimed my light across a maze of boxes and trunks packed with decades of memories. My gaze snagged on a crooked stack of faded photo albums. With a lump in my throat, I sank onto the dusty floor, pulling them into my lap one by one. Smiling faces of happier times beamed back at me. An 8-year-old Derek, freckles dancing across his nose as he grinned at the camera on his Little League baseball team's picture day. High school graduation, his lanky frame dwarfing that ridiculous maroon cap and gown. Our tight-knit trio on my front porch after he'd moved into his first college dorm room, already looking so grown up. My chest ached as I drank in every moment, unable to fathom how that sweet, vibrant boy had become the haggard, haunted man who ultimately couldn't outrun his demons. Then the photos shifted. Derek's energetic smile remained, but his arm was slung around a pretty blonde girl with an equally megawatt grin. Jenna. I'll never forget the day he arrived home from university on Christmas break, hands trembling with poorly disguised excitement as he introduced us to his new girlfriend. How her dimpled cheeks and sparkling eyes instantly camouflaged the punkish, asymmetrical haircut and bare midriff that made me inwardly cringe. She's the one, Mom. Derek had whispered to me in the kitchen that night as she dazzled my husband with some anecdote about hitchhiking through Amsterdam one summer. I know it seems crazy since we've only been dating for a few months, but she's my soulmate. Part of me wanted to bundle him back into his Star Wars sheets from childhood and never let him go. But I couldn't ignore the sheer incandescence radiating from my typically brooding son. So I smiled and welcomed Jenna into our family with open arms. How I lived to regret that decision. The subsequent albums told a heartbreaking tale, one of increasing loneliness on Derek's face as the wattage on Jenna's dimmed through their wedding portraits and into the first couple years of their marriage. Finally, I flipped to the last few pages and recoiled. Here were my grandsons, capturing in wide grins and crinkled nose giggles. But the woman beside them was utterly unrecognizable. Cold, hollow eyes bored into the camera. Painted smiles slashed across her taut face with all the authenticity of a circus clown. Where had my sweet, goofy Jenna gone? The one who taught me how to twerk at their engagement party? The girl who threatened to burn her eyebrows off while helping me make adorable, succulent pumpkin centerpieces for their fall wedding? Slapping the album shut, I shuddered as the revelations washed over me. Jenna's betrayal of Derek ran even deeper than I could have imagined. She'd sucked the very light and joy from his spirit long before his tragic demise last year. I swiped at the heated tears streaking my cheeks as a grim calm settled over me. Whatever drove Jenna to her current depths of immorality, her own children would not be her next victims. Not if I had any say in the matter. This is ridiculous. You can't keep my children from me. Jenna's shrill voice sliced through the diner's murmured chatter like fingernails on a chalkboard. I stiffened as she stormed up to our booth, eyes wild and knuckles blanched from clutching her purse strap. Alex and Caleb instantly shrank back against the cracked vinyl seat. Caleb whimpered, and I instinctively tugged them closer under the safety of my arms. Don't you dare upset them further, I warned in a low tone. The boys are terrified of you, Jenna, and after what you pulled, can you blame them? Her lips curled into an ugly sneer. Oh, so you've turned them against their own mother? That's rich, coming from the woman who poisoned Derek against me for years. I opened my mouth to retort, but she cut me off with a harsh laugh. Save your breath, Lorraine. I want full custody, effective immediately. If you don't hand them over willingly, I'll take you to court and make you regret the day you ever met me. Shaking her head slowly, she leveled me with a chilling glare. Mark my words, you won't be able to protect them forever. With that ominous vow hanging in the air, she spun on her spiked heel and stormed out, leaving us all shaken. I clutched the boys tighter, feeling their tiny bodies trembling against mine. They shouldn't have to endure this trauma, not from the person who was supposed to nurture and safeguard them. When we returned home, Sheriff Davis was waiting on the front porch, hands shoved in his pockets. We finally got to the bottom of what Jenna's been up to, he said grimly, and it's not good. My heart plummeted as he recounted a twisted web of fraud, theft, and money laundering, all stemming from Jenna's efforts to siphon funds from Derek's life insurance payout after his death. She set up shell companies, forged documents, you name it, the sheriff said, shaking his grizzled head. From what we can gather, her crazy behavior was all an act. A way to get the boys out of her hair so she could pull off this whole scam undetected. White-hot fury blazed through me at the thought of her using our sweet grandsons as disposable pawns in her greed-fueled games. I wanted to scream, to hurl plates at the wall, to unleash the pure, primal rage burning in my veins. But I couldn't. Not with those two sets of fearful eyes, watching my every move, clinging to me as their solitary beacon of stability. So I inhaled a slow, steadying breath. Whatever Jenna's motivations, she's proven herself an unfit parent who's put them in danger. I want full legal custody. Relief flickered across the sheriff's face. I'll make sure our case against her is airtight. You just focus on taking care of those boys. He started toward his cruiser, then paused. And Lorraine, if she tries anything else, you let me know immediately. You hear? I offered a terse nod, then scooped Alex and Caleb into my arms, their small bodies melting into my embrace like they'd never let go. Jenna could hurl whatever malicious threats she desired. I didn't care about her con artist scheming or her vile machinations to line her pockets with my son's hard-earned money. All I cared about were these two precious souls who had already witnessed and endured far too much in their young lives. They were my entire world now. And if Jenna delusionally thought I'd relinquish them without a brutal fight to the death, she was soon to be rudely awakened. So you're really going to fight me on this? Jenna's derisive laugh crackled through the phone line. You senile old bat. I'll bury you. I clutched the receiver tighter, struggling against the flood of rage testing my restraint. If you think I'll let you within a mile of those boys after what you've done, you're delirious. We'll see about that. The smug venom in her tone made my skin crawl. My lawyer is prepping an ironclad case as we speak. You might have been able to manipulate the local cops, but I'd like to see you talk your way out of this in an actual courtroom. The line went dead with an ominous click. I slowly returned the phone to its cradle, steadying my ragged breaths. I'd expected Jenna's threats, expected the nasty accusations and diversionary tactics in a desperate attempt to regain control of her twisted game. But her arrogance made one fatal miscalculation. She had severely underestimated the resolve of a lifelong educator pushed to her limits. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I studied the two tow-headed figures sprawled across the guest bed in a jumble of sheets and gangly limbs. Bruises and scrapes mottled their arms, remnants of being abandoned in the park like unwanted pound puppies. But their cherubic faces were finally relaxed in peaceful slumber, no longer etched with fear and uncertainty. In that moment, I vowed to do whatever was required to preserve this newfound serenity they so desperately craved, which meant playing Jenna's macabre game and beating her at it without hesitation. I strode into the study and booted up my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I toggled between search engine results for top private investigators near me and local family law attorneys with stellar custody case track records. Time was of the essence if I wanted to mount an unshakable offensive before Jenna beat me to the courtroom battlefield. 2 phone calls and a hurried conference later, and I'd assembled an elite cadre of legal warriors ready to dismantle whatever vitriolic crusade Jenna tried to wage. We're going to rip her facade to shreds from every angle. Annalise, the razor-sharp family law specialist, assured me over steaming mugs of coffee. Money trails, witness statements, a full forensic analysis of her involvement in your son's death. She won't know what hit her. The other woman, Mei Ling, was one of the area's most sought-after private eyes, having cracked countless high-stakes cases with her enigmatic brand of perception and grit. Her obsidian eyes glinted with determination. I already have leads indicating Jenna's scam goes far deeper than just fraud. We're talking organized crime rings, money laundering operations spanning multiple states. There's a good chance she had Derek killed to inherit those insurance funds. A collective chill reverberated around the table. I slowly lifted my gaze, feeling their scrutiny. I don't care what stones need to be upturned or what vermin you need to smoke out, I stated with flinty resolve. That thing is not going to terrorize my grandsons any longer. I want her exposed for the vile, heartless snake she is, and I want those boys to feel safe again." Mei Ling and Annalise exchanged weighted looks before giving terse nods of understanding. We knew the battle lines had been drawn, and all bets were officially off. Jenna wanted to sick her high-priced legal team on me? Let her wage her war. Little did she know I relished the chance to go nuclear if pushed. And I hadn't survived 5 decades as an inner-city educator by playing nice with bullies. The tension in the cramped courthouse conference room was thicker than New England clam chowder. I could barely meet the clouded gazes of the disheveled strangers flanking my sides, members of the jury still reeling from the bombshell revelations. Jenna attempted a sickly sweet smile as she rose from the table, emaciated frame swimming in her designer pantsuit, but the wanton arrogance that usually dripped from her had been extinguished, replaced by the skittish panic of a rat in a trap. I kept my own expression steeled and impassive, fighting against the savage curl of satisfaction in my gut. We weren't quite at checkmate yet. "Let's be reasonable here," she began in that saccharine lilt that used to grate my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "I never meant for things to go this far. You all have to believe I only wanted what was best for my children." Mei Ling made a derisive noise beside me, thumbing through the damning evidence portfolio. Photos of money trails and encrypted communications between Jenna and a notorious cartel kingpin. Ballistics reports tying the revolver used to kill Derek to one of the mobster's henchmen. A chilling CCTV clip capturing Jenna's vehicle leaving the scene of the accident, moments after Derek's truck plunged over the ravine. "Is that so?" Mei Ling arched one sculpted eyebrow. "Because these financial ledgers suggest you spent over $2 million on designer handbags, high-stakes gambling jaunts to Monaco, and a literal palace in the Dominican Republic, all from the insurance payout after murdering your own husband." Jenna's mask faltered, replacing the sugary syrup with a hiss of venom. "You self-righteous vultures wouldn't understand. I was trapped in a loveless marriage, taken for granted at every turn. I deserved those things." "You deserve to leave your children orphaned and broke?" I growled, unable to contain myself any longer. "You deserve to slaughter their father, your own flesh and blood, in cold blood?" "Stay out of this, you cretinous relic," Jenna spat. "I had bigger plans, grander wealth waiting on the horizon. Derek was a stepping stone I needed to discard like all the others before him. Besides, it's not like those boys brought anything positive to my life." A collective shudder reverberated around the room. Even Jenna's own attorneys averted their gazes, disgust etched on their craggy faces. "Then I guess they dodged a pretty big bullet by winding up with their grandma instead of an egomaniacal sociopath like you," Mei Ling said, chin raised in defiant contempt. Lurching to her feet, Jenna unleashed the full force of her black rage. "Nobody was supposed to dig this deep. How dare you interfere with my destiny? Those brats and their pitiful trust fund were just the tip of the iceberg." She wheeled toward me, eyes wild with madness. "I hope you're prepared to suffer, Lorraine. Starting with watching your precious grandsons be stripped away once my associate's on the outside." The gavel cracked down as a hulking bailiff seized Jenna's flailing arms. "That's enough, ma'am. You've already dug your grave deeper than hell itself." In the pandemonium, Annalise discreetly slid her hand over my clenched fist under the table. A small, grim smile tugged at her lips. "We got her," she murmured, "in front of the entire jury. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering violations, criminal negligence toward minors. The rap sheet goes on and on. By the time we present our closing arguments, she'll be praying to go away for life instead of lethal injection." With dawning realization, I glanced around at the pale, stricken faces of the jurors, middle-class Americans much like myself, looking as if they'd witnessed the devil herself unleashed on their quiet hamlet. Not one semblance of sympathy remained for the raving, unhinged woman being restrained before us. In that surreal moment, the gravity of the victory sank in. My son's legacy had been preserved. My grandchildren had been pried from the clutches of a demonic succubus by the barest margins before it was too late. And the deranged charlatan who almost stole everything from me in her quest for wealth and power would finally be entombed where she belonged, in a cage. As Jenna's unhinged howls receded down the courthouse corridor, I felt the leaden weight of tension slough off my shoulders for the first time in over a year. An era of healing could finally commence. A heavy silence blanketed the courtroom as we reassembled the following day for closing arguments and sentencing. Jenna had been temporarily removed, giving the jurors some respite from her poisonous presence before delivering their verdict. But the tension was still palpable, a suffocating dread that the unthinkable could still transpire and that vile harpy might somehow slither away unscathed. Mei Ling squeezed my arm as we took our places at the prosecution's table. Just a little while longer. Stay strong. I managed a resolute nod, scanning the crowd until my gaze landed on Alex and Caleb, flanked by their court-appointed guardian. Their angelic faces were somber, almost sage-like in their premature hardening against the realities they'd been forced to endure. It fortified my resolve to see this malignancy eradicated from their lives once and for all. They deserved the world, warm homes, unconditional love, blissful days of chasing lightning bugs and jumping into leaf piles. Not this paradigm of toxicity and reckless self-interest. The courtroom fell into a hush as the bailiff escorted Jenna inside, her rail-thin wrists encased in shackles. Our eyes bored into one another, hazel meeting ice blue in a silent clash of wills. "State your final remarks," the judge intoned, his weary tone betraying the aftershocks of the evidence he'd presented over the last several days. Jenna rose on shaky legs, painted lips pursing into a defiant sneer. "I have no final remarks, aside from the fact that this biased, uncultured backwater of a town has no comprehension of the grandeur I was born to achieve." A disgusted titter rippled across the gallery. Jenna's gaze flickered around the room before landing squarely on me, that sneer metastasizing into a look of pure, undiluted hatred. "They're my sons, my flesh and blood, not this decrepit harpy's. Yet because of your deranged witch hunt, I've been robbed of my rightful legacy, all for the sake of two ungrateful little bastards who did nothing but hold me back." Her voice rose to a shrill screech, spittle flying. "They don't deserve my fortune or my empire. I hope they rot right alongside you for the rest of their pathetic—" "Miss Mitchell?" The judge's boom reverberated like a shotgun blast, startling Jenna into stunned silence. "I will have order in this court." He turned his withering glare toward the jurors, who flinched collectively. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, as well as the defendant's own admissions of guilt, any further grandstanding is unnecessary. Tugging on the hem of his robe, the judge exhaled a solemn sigh. "Jenna Mitchell, this court finds you guilty beyond all reasonable doubt on all counts, including first-degree murder, criminal conspiracy, child endangerment, money laundering, and racketeering. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." An anguished howl spilled from Jenna's twisted lips as the sentence hit home. "No, you can't do this to me. I was destined. I was meant for glory, for opulence." Two burly bailiffs gripped her flailing arms as she fought against their restraints with feral desperation. "Let me go. I won't rot in your cages, you pathetic scum. Alex, Caleb, you were supposed to be my legacy." Our eyes met one final time across the courtroom as she was hauled toward the doors. Ironic, the woman who had sacrificed her own children in pursuit of greatness was now little more than a rabid dog being carted away from polite society. As the doors clanged shut behind her, an eerie silence fell over the room like the aftershock of a bomb blast. We all remained motionless, struggling to process the finality of it. Then, a tiny sound pierced the hush, the muffled sniffle of a child crying. I whipped around to see Caleb burying his face in his guardian's shoulder, whole body shaking with sobs of bewildered relief and anguish. Alex's jaw was set in a rigid line, but crystalline tears streaked down his ashen cheeks. In that moment, my heart both swelled and shattered at once. No child should ever have to witness such depravity, least of all from the person who gave them life. But as I pulled them both into my embrace, permitting myself to finally unleash the torrent I'd pent up for far too long, I swore on my life it was the last trauma they would suffer. From here, their worlds could only grow kinder and brighter. The spacious backyard was bathed in a warm summer glow as the evening shadows lengthened across the grass. Raucous laughter and the crack of baseball against aluminum echoed through the twilight air. "Heads up, Grandma!" I barely had time to glance over my shoulder before the battered softball whistled past my head, Caleb's voice ringing out in a peal of unbridled mirth. Clutching my chest in mock horror, I shook my head at the now 10-year-old cherub barreling toward me. "You rascal! Where did you learn to throw like that?" "From Alex," Caleb proclaimed proudly, puffing out his narrow chest. "He's teaching me all his pitches so I can make the all-star team next year like him." I ruffled his sandy curls, speckled with grass stains and sweat. "Is that so? Well, you two had better work up an appetite for those famous Mitchell family burgers I'm about to fire up." "Yes!" Caleb crowed, bounding across the yard to where Alex stood whipping pitches into an ancient catcher's mitt. At 12 years old, he was rapidly morphing into a young man, all knobby wrists and elbows jutting out at haphazard angles, yet the easygoing smile crinkling his eyes kept the last vestiges of boyish innocence intact. For now. As I busied myself stoking the grill, they resumed their impromptu batting practice, periodic whoops piercing the evening calm. Just a couple of rambunctious boys being boys, the way nature intended. Idly flipping the burgers, I couldn't help but gaze at them with a contented sense of pride and reverence. 2 years ago, they had arrived on my doorstep as skittish, traumatized waifs, their childhoods robbed from them by that soulless, vicious monster. But to see them now, shrieking and tussling on the grass with all the wild abandon of kids their age, it was nothing short of a miracle reborn from the ashes. "Grandma?" I glanced up to find them hovering at the edge of the concrete patio, grass stains crisscrossing their knees and T-shirts askew. Caleb fidgeted in that familiar way he did when broaching a sensitive topic. You don't have any other grandkids, do you? Just us?" My breath hitched slightly as I studied their earnest young faces. It was something I'd never pressed them on, not wanting to risk dredging up memories of that shattered former life. "No, honey," I replied gently. "Just my 2 favorite grandsons." Alex scuffed at the patio with his toe, jaw tightening the way it always did when wrestling with something monumental. "So you wouldn't mind if we didn't want to go by Mitchell anymore?" A pregnant pause stretched between us as my mind whirred, processing the weight of their request. Then Caleb barreled ahead in typical headlong fashion. "It's just, you're not like her, Grandma. And that name, it reminds us of all those bad, scary times we want to forget. We want your name instead, to match our real family." His imploring gaze shimmered with unshed tears, and I felt my throat constrict as the profundity of his plea washed over me. In that moment, I saw the depth of their courage shining through, 2 little warriors who had conquered more darkness than men 4 times their age. Clearing my throat, I turned to give Alex, my solemn, sensitive soul, an opportunity to voice what he'd clearly been mustering for a while. He held my gaze steadily. "Mitchell was never who we really were anyway. You're all we have, Grandma, and all we'll ever need." The words tumbled out in a childlike rush, but their impact was profound and eternal. A renewal of selfhood, an absolving of the shackles that had bound them to that venomous succubus's legacy. Crossing the patio in 2 strides, I enveloped them in my arms as my own tears finally spilled free. A kaleidoscope of memories ricocheted through me. Motherless childhood, dreams of raising kids in a loving home of my own one day, then the heartsick reality of being alone as an empty nester. Until these 2 battered little souls had resurrected my world from the ashes of despair. And now they were my entire universe. "Of course, my sweet boys," I whispered through the thickness gripping my throat. "From now on you'll have the family name you were always meant for. Sutherland. My Sutherland grandsons." Their answering embrace tightened with wordless emotion searing deeper than any dialect. A bygone open wound had finally mended into an unbreakable seal of wholeness. Jenna had gambled everything in pursuit of superficial glory, only to be banished into perpetual insignificance. But I, just an ordinary Midwestern widow, had reclaimed the greatest prize of all, a true, unshakable family, bound by the eternal ties of unconditional love.